Hidden beneath this lush Belgian countryside are some of the most horrific killing fields in human history. No Man's Land is a group of archaeologists, forensic experts and historians. They are here to find evidence of the Great War, for this is the site of the Third Battle of Ypres, commonly known as Passchendaele. A battle fought in 1917, where man and beast drowned in a churning sea of mud.
This is the First World War at its most industrial, at its most developed.
They aimed to unearth the remains of a complex trench system before it could be lost forever beneath the new highway project.
Every year, another fragment of the Western Front disappears under some kind of modern development.
And along the way, No Man's Land will discover a watch that sets them off on a journey to trace its owner, a soldier, one of the fallen.
Yes, there he is, look!
In 1917, with more than a year to go before the end of the Great War, soldiers in northern France and Belgium were living, fighting and dying in a massive trench system snaking its way across Europe. Heavy shell firing and torrential rains had forced trench building to evolve. Martin Brown, archaeologist and member of No Man's Land, is looking for telltale signs of these later trenches.
Yeah. One of the things you can do is, as you look at the soil, you can see the changes in colour. And you see mostly it's this nice sort of browny yellow colour, but coming across it, you've got different stains, different smears, and we've got some nice long metallic red staining and bits of metal.
Rust patterns in the earth from corrugated iron that reinforced the trenches. July the 31st, 1917, saw the beginning of one of the most controversial and devastating battles of the Great War, the Battle of Passchendaele. The British idea was to fight through to the English Channel and deny German U-boats the use of Belgian ports. It was a sound theory that turned into carnage. Not far from the dig site is the scene of a contemporary battle. David Kenyon is a commercial archaeologist and member of No Man's Land.
The reason we're here is because there is a proposal by the Belgian government to put a motorway more or less straight along the front line, and so a lot of the archaeology, the Great War archaeology here, is potentially about to disappear under a lot of concrete. We're stood now right on the end of the existing motorway embankment, and you can see quite clearly behind me that the embankment stops and there's open country behind. But that's not just fields back there, that's literally the front line heading off in that direction. So the route of the motorway is through No Man's Land for about 5 or 10 kilometres at this point. And so all that belt of history and archaeology up there is potentially under threat from further motorway construction. Every year, another fragment of the Western Front disappears under some kind of modern development. So there's quite a strong imperative for people to start looking at this material before it disappears.
These are Flanders fields where poppies grew and young men slept, crawled, fought and drowned in mud.
The weather's given us an accidental or an intentional insight into the lives of the soldiers, because the rain has really damped the soil down, and walking about is difficult. We're sliding around. It's just harder work than it should be, getting up and down the site.
Andy Robertshaw, another team member and historian at Britain's National Army Museum, is an expert on how soldiers lived in the trenches.
Got a boot.
His expertise is needed from day one and unearths the team's first evidence of the nightmarish conditions of the Passchendaele battlefield. Leather boots and rubber waders. Solving the mystery takes Robertshaw into the very heart of this horrific battle.
There's the bits of shell fragment.
What we've just got out of the ground here is a pair of standard British Army boots made of brown leather with a rough side out, which means you can rub them over with dubbing, a waterproofer, and it would soak in really easily. What I'm interested in is the circumstances in which somebody would abandon a pair of boots. Soldiers weren't meant to take them off in the trenches, so I can't really think why they would have been taken off. Even for a wounded man, he keeps his boots on. So I can only assume it's down to having something else to put on, like a pair of waders, and then dumping them in the hope of coming back later on. This says to me very wet weather, in which these things were put down by a soldier, putting on a pair of more waterproof footwear so he can do some work in the trenches. Never finding them in the mud until we turned them up a few minutes ago.
The battle at Passchendaele began in a summer heat wave, but torrential rains changed everything. Andy has his own water supply on tap.
What we're trying to do on this rather hot day is to replicate the change in weather that occurred during the Battle of Passchendaele. The battle begins in a heat wave in July. Rapidly in September, weather breaks down completely. What they got was just days after days of torrential downpour. That wouldn't have been too bad, except the water table is very high and there was a very, very carefully laid out system of drainage. Shell fire, men moving, completely destroyed it. And the water just came up, trenches flooded, so did the shell holes. Turned into liquid mud. Meant that if you were wounded, you fell into a shell hole, you're going to drown.
More than 500,000 men died at Passchendaele, many of them drowning in the waist-high mud of the battlefield or its water-filled shell holes.
That's it, put your foot in one of those holes, will you? Okay? And the camera then is just about over there, further back, and then this guy here, standing back like that. That's virtually it.
The team unearthed pieces of fabric and an object wrapped in newspaper that turns out to be an extremely rare find.
It's not ticking. Okay. What we got? Oh, great. Oh, fantastic.
Here you go. Wristwatch.
Good Lord. Absolutely astounding.
Yeah.
I mean, the interesting thing about wristwatches is that this is where they start. They're one of those weird byproducts of the First World War that we all still use. Officers found particularly that fiddling around inside to get a pocket watch out was ridiculous. So these things were invented, and often with luminous dials, so they could see in what the time was in the early morning and in the night. I've never seen one before, one from this period. It's great. Thank you. That was beautifully done. Really nice.
Oh wow.
Oh wow, indeed.
Wristwatch.
Wristwatch. Beautiful.
Martin Brown brings the watch to no man's land forensic specialist Luke Barber.
Or a number, or yes.
It's not another piece of issued kit, it's not another piece of ammunition, this is someone's personal watch. And this is what makes it really come alive, that they're not just soldiers you're talking about here, but they are individuals.
You're actually starting to theorise and start to play the games in your head about who did this belong to and why and what can we tell from it? How did it get here?
It suggests to me that the watch may have been wrapped in newspaper, maybe to keep it safe from breakage.
Was it given to somebody to, take this back to my dear old mother as he's gasping his last in his friend's arms?
It may have actually fallen out of an individual's pocket while they were in the trench. They didn't see it in the mud. Someone later went and stamped on it, not knowingly, and broke the face.
Has it been taken from a body? Has someone looted a body and then found out it didn't work?
And what we do know, for sure, is the person who dropped it never did see it again.
Luke Barber sends the watch for examination at the Forensic Archaeology Lab at University College London. The UCL team carefully cleans the fragile watch. It's been determined that the watch is an Ingersoll of the right vintage, made in the United States. Dean Sully is looking for distinguishing features on its leather band.
What's most clearly evident is an L here, and we're fairly sure that's a G. We have another line, which I think is the end of the word sequence. That's possibly a D there. And at the beginning of the sequence we have an N here, but the other letters in between are fairly indistinct. And because we weren't sure what we were looking at, we asked a range of people to have a look and give us what they wanted, or what they saw in the sequence. So we had a range of different possibilities, and this was just one sequence, which, I don't know, the closest word we could think of was Kungl. Other people's attempts, Ludwig.
Eventually, consensus is reached.
Well, I think looking at it more clearly, we can see an N, a G, an L, and then possibly an N or a D at the end of the word. So this looks like England.
The search is on for a soldier named England who fought at Passchendaele and scratched his name on his watch strap. On the Passchendaele battlefield, No Man's Land find evidence of the first use in human history of weapons of mass destruction, a gas mask. The Germans were the first to use gas in warfare at the Battle of Ypres in 1915 against unprepared French, Canadian and British forces. 2 years later, soldiers at Passchendaele had better protection.
What we've got here is the face piece from a hypo helmet. This is a replica of that, exactly the same thing. But this bag was used over the head as a very early form of gas protection after the first gas attack here at Ypres. The bag has a chemical on it, it filters the gas out, and this actually goes there. It's then stitched in, and it allows you to look out.
Well,
That's absolutely wonderful.
I butted in, I thought you wouldn't see
A
that.
team finds a more advanced gas mask. As the German gas attacks became more sophisticated, so the protection offered to soldiers evolved.
I've never seen this. The level of survival is absolutely, wonderful. This is a replica, it's not the real thing, but it's a good replica. What have we got?
Well, we've got this bit,
Yep.
which is that bit.
Well, that's the non-return valve, the rubber valve, which stops you drawing gas in, when you breathe back in again, because you're meant to draw the air with gas in it through the hood, which has a chemical in it, which filters out the gas. What else we got?
And then we've got the eyepieces, we've got these two circular iron fixed here with little bits of glass in.
Okay, put it on, pull it down.
Then you put the
Valve.
gas.
Yeah, quicker than that normally. Okay.
And ecstasy of fumbling and all that.
Yeah. And you're trying to get that valve in your mouth, and you're breathing in through your nose and out through your mouth. If you blow hard, you'll see those little things expand. That's it. Breathe in, it collapses. Breathe out. Any problems?
Hang on. It's steamed up, so I can't actually see anything. Well, if the Germans are coming, I can't see them, I'll tell you that much.
Absolutely. And they know that.
The other thing is, the breathing in is very difficult. I don't know if you can hear me at all, but the fabric is quite heavy, so there's very little air in here.
Yeah. So any physical exertion means that you really can't function. So one of the things that they would do is use gas, particularly on people serving guns, because they're moving the guns around, they're carrying ammunition. With that on, it gets very difficult. People slow right down. Then they get panicky, pull the thing off, and that's when it kills you. When we looking for somebody called England. We had a name, that's all we had. We had to then tie that down to a place and to a date. So we knew where we were working, and we knew the date we were looking around, which was the 31st of July 1917. So it made sense to go on, look at all those soldiers who were killed called England, and there were about 10 pages, so an awful lot of names. Narrowing it down to that location and roughly around that date, and to units that went through that area, we came down to 3 names. Essentially, it led to one man, J.H. England. We're working on the premise that this could be our man, and he was fighting in the right place at the right time.
The search leads another team member, Steve Roberts, to the Great War Military Archives of London's Public Record Office.
Each one of these fish contains 6 separate cards. And everyone on here is the surname of England, starting from the initial J England, going through to England W. I mean, there's at least 64 on there, plus however many cards there are preceding and after. James George, John G, and now we're starting to get the JHs. John H.
The team knows that a John H. England fought at Passchendaele and died there on July the 31st, 1917.
Here we are. We have a John Humphrey England, 7th Battalion, the Welsh Regiment, serving as a private soldier, then commissioned as a 2nd Lieutenant into the Welsh Regiment. Date of death is shown on here as well, killed in action on the 31st of the 7th, 17. So this is the chap that Andy Robertshaw's pointed me in the direction of. The details I've got on here confirm those I was given by Andy.
At the site of where John Humphrey England fought and died, Andy Robertshaw makes another discovery.
Okay, so take me through it and let's have a look.
Okay, what we have here, single layer.
More here. It then goes down in folds down here. But any buttons? One. What kind? Oh, it's not much left of that. No. I mean, tunic or greatcoat, my presumption is that if there's no human remains, it's actually a greatcoat, because you're going to take your greatcoat off, you're not going to take your tunic off.
An army greatcoat designed for winter, weighed 7 pounds but close to 30 when drenched by the torrential rains and coated with the mud of Passchendaele. And in the cold and wet of the 1917 trenches, it was virtually impossible to dry off a sodden coat.
Yeah, it's someone's greatcoat.
Someone's bundled it up and
Sat on it?
possibly, or he's just put it out of the back of the trench for a short period of time and then...
Never picked it up again.
Yeah.
That's a belt from a greatcoat. It is a greatcoat.
It is a greatcoat.
And there's the belt from it.
Yeah.
It's a fabric belt that goes to it. Collar.
Yeah, there's a collar.
At London's Public Records Office, Steve Roberts is closing in on John England's personal history.
Okay. We've on the back of this form is one of the more useful items in terms of identification. It's the medical inspection report, which is completed on his enlistment. And it's about the closest we're going to get to any form of physical description of John England. His apparent age on enlistment here is shown as 17 years and 6 months. He's shown as 5'8" in height. He's obviously quite well known in the village as well, because one of the referees he appoints to give evidence of his moral character is the vicar of his village.
The vicar is long gone, but his church still stands in the village of Llanishen, South Wales. Archaeologist Martin Brown picks up the trail with local history enthusiasts.
And as it says, the west window was erected to the glory of Almighty God in the honoured memory of the men from the parish who made the supreme sacrifice for king and country in the Great War 1914 to 1919. And as you can see, I think it's 1, 2, 3 foot 5, John Humphrey England.
There he is. Yes.
Yeah. This is a copy of the 1890 map and on the back is Lanishan. And they list the people that lived in Lanishan at that time.
Yes.
And this must be his father here. And it says that he lived England, Tom, Harker,
Yes.
Station Road.
John Humphrey England was the only son and eldest child of Tom and Minnie England. Tom was an accountant with the railway, and the family lived on Station Road. In 1914, at the outbreak of war, the couple were living a comfortable middle-class life with their 3 daughters and 17-and-a-half-year-old son who was about to enlist.
It's 90 years ago that Jack England, J.H. England, walked out through that front door and went off and enlisted in His Majesty's Armed Forces. The great thing about this house is it's really redolent of the social background that we know England came from. His father's an accountant, he's working for the railway company, that means he's professional class. You know, this is the sort of person that one expects infantry officers of the Great War to come from. They're educated, they're moneyed. It's a comfortable dwelling. It's the sort of house that one thinks of that golden age of Edwardian England before it all comes collapsing in 1914 when the war breaks out. It's the sort of house that somebody goes to the grammar school from, as he did. It's the sort of house that somebody then possibly goes on to private school, as he did to finish his education in Taunton. And it's the sort of house that one expects an infantry officer, one of those Journey's End boys, the golden youth of that summer of 1914, to go off to war from. And like so many, having left through that front door, he never gets to return through it.
On the outbreak of war, most gentlemen had a watch, and it was a watch like this one, which essentially is a pocket watch. It sits in your pocket, look at the time, you've got to do that, and then put it away again. It's fairly cumbersome, but it's safe, it doesn't get knocked about. As the war went on, it became pretty clear that wearing a watch on your wrist made a lot more sense, but there are problems with that one. They're very vulnerable to getting smashed, so a whole range of cages were developed to go over the watch, stop it from getting damaged. The one here is the watch that was found in the trench near Ypres. It actually looks very much more like a pocket watch than a wristwatch. Because it's a new item, the wearing of a wristwatch is regarded as being very modern. It's something that young men like doing. Older men would often resist it. Some people refuse to wear them at all, although they could see the advantages. And why are people getting obsessed about time? It's really quite simple. You need to know when the guards are going to be changed if you're on sentry go. You need to know when the attack will go, and you need to know when the artillery barrage is going to come down. This war, you have to be precise to the second.
For John England, like all soldiers, the trenches would become home. And small comforts offered an escape from the daily horrors of war.
This is absolutely fantastic. I'm so pleased with this. Chances are we're seeing evidence of comforts from home and doing your little bit of replicating your life at home in the trenches, in the dugouts, and it's just got turfed out with all the rubbish. But look at that. I've got corks in worse condition than that at home that were taken out of the wine bottles last week. That's absolutely marvellous. And that's the top of a petrol can, I think, isn't it?
A petrol or gas can supplied a basic need for men at the front.
Petrol cans are interesting things because they're used for carrying petrol, as you would imagine. They also use them for carrying water up to the front line, and one of the things that you read a lot of and you hear a lot of are accounts of the soldiers complaining bitterly that the water arrives and they're sitting in the line, they're desperate for water, and it tastes of petrol.
Wow! Fantastic!
Well,
The find is one of the iconic objects of the Great War.
It's a rum jar.
Archaeologist Martin Brown knows this is no ordinary jug.
and we look down at that rum jar, and that becomes the single most important
thing in your life, doesn't it, if you're having to live in conditions like this?
Absolutely. The only disappointing thing might be that although everyone imagines they had rum in it, they could also have things like lime juice in them, which is nothing quite so exciting. But hopefully this one would have had rum in it.
I hope so, yeah. Remind me, SRD, I can never remember.
Service Ration Depot.
You know, the SRD is a proper stamp, but the soldiers always said it meant seldom reaches destination.
Team member Steve Roberts is starting to build a picture of John England, the man.
He spent a year serving with the colours. During that time, he's undergone physical training. He's a young schoolboy who's, over the course of a year, has developed from a 17-and-a-half-year-old boy to a young 18-and-a-half-year-old man. He's done his time in the UK, spent a year, 344 days, roughly, in the UK. He actually seems like he now wants to get out to France and start taking part, which is what you would expect of a young man of the time.
The team uncovers a poignant reminder of the horrors of Passchendaele, the remains of a rickety shelter put up to give the men a few moments of reprieve from the torrential rains.
So I suppose that is a collapsed roof. I'm not sure, but that
right.
Would be...
So there's waterproofing,
yeah,
strengthening,
and then
timbers,
and sandbags
and then
on top.
Sandbags as a burster layer. Yeah. Great.
And this could be the entrance with the planks just beside it.
And what's happened to it?
Well, you see the timbers at the back, they're angled.
Yeah.
And it looks like the whole roof's just snapped and come in. So.
I mean, certainly the Royal Engineers, when they do reports on this kind of stuff, they say they hate this kind of structure because if you're going to lay timbers, you must put it on something solid. Putting it onto anything like sandbags, it's just too soft, and the weight of the material on top just squashes the whole thing in. And even a near miss and so on, it'll collapse. And whether this has collapsed just over time or whether it went in during the war, I don't know. But certainly the engineers would not have been impressed by that.
It's absolutely proving what they said right then.
Yeah, they just cave in. They're death traps.
How's it going then?
Yeah, it's pretty good actually. We've got really quite a complex sequence going on here.
Yeah.
Soldiers at Passchendaele engaged in a constant battle against the rain and the mud that oozed in the trenches, making their lives an unending misery.
Which we can see running off under there. So we've actually got an in-situ sandbag. There's still some actually surviving here, even in there. And then they've also put...
No Man's Land unearths 3 years in the life of one such trench. 3 years in which the trench was rebuilt 4 times to combat the mud. Layer upon layer of wood planks and sandbags.
Yeah. So that's 4 levels of trench board within a foot.
Yeah.
So
that's pretty clear, isn't it? That
it shows you how wet muddy,
this...
just constant chore it must have been, keeping the trench free to walk down. The thickness of mud between one trench board and the next. So there's where they would be walking at one point. They've got that much mud they're walking on before they think, hey, sod this.
Yeah.
We're putting another board down on top.
I mean, this is a real insight into trench life, isn't it? That I think people have this image that soldiers come into the line and they sit around braziers or in dugouts, and then they just wait to be involved in combat. And actually, most of what they're doing is repair and it's work.
Yeah, absolutely.
Working parties and keeping the trench in good order, revetting with sandbags, making these things, and it's a constant process.
And you imagine doing it under the threat of fire all the time.
Oh, quite.
It would have been awful, absolutely awful.
The start of the Battle of Passchendaele was marked by a massive artillery bombardment. Over 4 million shells were fired at the German lines. The sound of the battle could be heard across the English Channel. It made venturing into no man's land a deadly business. Yet the wire needed constant reinforcing. John England, like all frontline soldiers, would have spent nights fortifying this barbed wire system. The team uncovers a piece of advanced war technology that saved countless lives. A high-tech fence post.
This is not in situ, it's just been dumped in the top of the trench, possibly at the end of the war during reconstruction of the landscape.
but you can see it's got these twists down it and this lovely big corkscrew twist on the bottom. Now the way one of these works is that's screwed into the ground, rather as we can see it here, albeit at the wrong angle, and the barbed wire is placed and stretched and wound through here to create the entanglements out there in no man's land. Now, when British Army, I think all forces, are initially out here at the beginning of the First War, they're using posts. They're hammering posts in and they're wiring to them, and that served the British very well in, say, the Boer War. Unfortunately, when you're out in no man's land doing that in the dark, the Germans over there are listening and they can hear thump, thump, thump. They listen, they hear the thump, 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 and then they range a machine gun on it, and you lose your working party. So the British developed this. You can stick a piece of wood through there, and you can twist it into the ground, just like a giant corkscrew. It's a silent picket. Wiring is still a very nasty, dangerous job. Men hate doing it, but this does definitely improve your chances of coming back at the end of the night.
On November the 17th, 1916, John England took a leading role in a raid behind the lines of a key German stronghold. The raid came after 6 weeks of dress rehearsals on mock-ups behind the lines. Perhaps with one last glance at the very wristwatch uncovered by no man's land, England and 6 other officers led 145 men on a meticulously planned night attack. The raiders returned with 20 German prisoners and stacks of paper intelligence. By 1917, constant artillery shelling and Passchendaele's sea of mud had forced trench design to evolve. And no man's land, digging down from the telltale signs of rust-coloured soil lines, have finally unearthed the iron-clad trench that lay hidden and silent for decades.
After 2 years of war, they've got very used to trench warfare, and people are adapting on the job all the time. So instead of very resource heavy in terms of timber revetting or wattling with woven branches, which is a skilled job, they've gone to this sort of stuff, which is corrugated iron. That's being held in place by 1, 2 timber posts. Now these in turn are not just driven in on their own. They are probably the bottom half of an A-frame, so-called, because it looks like an inverted capital letter A.
What we've actually got then is a means of supporting our trench boards, giving a space underneath into which water can run, and therefore meaning the men aren't walking all the time with their feet in mud and slime. They're actually standing on trench boards above that. And this is being replicated up and down the Western Front, and it demonstrates the sophistication that's been achieved by 1916, by 1917.
I'm sitting at the bottom of an incredibly well-preserved set of trench remains. You can see the corrugated iron revetments holding back the mud, the A-frames holding back the mud and supporting these trench boards. There are cross pieces in front of me here. There's a bracing piece there and over there, again holding the revetments apart, keeping the whole thing in place. And one of the reasons for that is behind me, because the trench stops there. It's been closed off because there's evidence of a massive shell burst. Shells come over like giant shotgun cartridges. They airburst and scatter these lead balls down into the trench. It's why helmets are introduced. And just in there, that's where 16 or so hand grenades were found, in position, ready to repel an attack if the Germans had come across no man's land towards the British trenches here.
The trench was destroyed by high explosive shells, which may be a clue as to why John England's watch survived Passchendaele, but his remains were never found.
This is an artillery war. That's why people live in trenches. And of course a big shell won't leave a nice skeleton that we can excavate. It leaves bits. There's a phrase, knocked to spots. What it means is you're knocked to pieces the size of an old penny, and you're just smeared across the trenches. And actually. The entire sum of human remains from the site can be fitted into a bag this size. That's it. It's one skull fragment and one wisdom tooth. That was a man.
This is where we find that John didn't, as we suspected, didn't go any further. What I've actually got here is a copy of the telegram which would have been sent to John's next of kin. Deeply regret to inform you, 2nd Lieutenant J.H. England, the Welsh Regiment, was killed in action July the 31st. The Army Council expresses their sympathy. So, well. You look at it and you always hear the stories of the telegram being delivered, but to actually have one in your hand and be looking at it, and actually, it's somebody that you're actually starting to get to know. That's the problem. There. Anyway, it confirms that young Mr. England didn't go any further than 2nd Lieutenant.
We've no way of knowing what happened to John H. England on the 31st of July 1917. Only that as the Welsh Regiment moved off, they took casualties from the very beginning. In normal trench warfare, you're actually down below ground level. The big risk to you is shell fire, shell splinters, shrapnel. And certainly many men who were then killed either simply drowned in the mud or actually just fall into the mud itself and are lost.
The trenches of Passchendaele were the last home of John Humphrey England. He died there on July the 31st, 1917, just a month after his 20th birthday. A month after getting the news of his death, his father wrote a letter to the War Office.
Now, this is a letter from his father dated August 1917. Dear Sir, with reference to your letter of the 24th of August, in regard to the effects of the late 2nd Lieutenant John H. England, 14th Battalion, the Welsh Regiment, I have now received from Messrs. Cox Shipping Agency, this is the officers' shipping agency who are responsible for returning personal effects, a package which simply contains his old clothes and kit bag. The following articles of value have not been returned. Prismatic glasses, a prismatic compass, and a watch. It doesn't give any description, it just says watch. We know that we have a watch, possibly with the name England on it. And here I am looking at somebody's name, or somebody's papers by the name of England, and lo and behold, his watch is missing. It didn't go home with the rest of his belongings.
The War Office wrote, owing to abnormal conditions attached to active service, delay in the recovery and transmission of such effects is frequently unavoidable.
That's the end of that. Brilliant. Thank you very much.
The search for living relatives of John Humphrey England leads Martin Brown to Wales, where the family came from. In Cardiff, he meets up with Richard England, a great-nephew of Lieutenant John England.
Hello, you must be Richard.
You're the archaeologist.
Yes, Martin Brown. Hello.
And you're the guy who actually found the watch.
Yes, and I have it with me in my pocket.
I don't believe it. It's so longing to see it.
Well,
Yes,
we can do that, yeah. And I gather you've been doing work on
I
England?
have, yes. I'm so keen on
Oh, fantastic. And
tracing sort of genealogy and the family history in any case. And
Right.
to find the person who actually saw it and found it
And-
in the mud,
and sat in-
several feet down.
and sat in the trenches that he probably was in and his men
Yeah.
worked on, and
Was it a very muddy, wet day like it was the day he died?
Yes, yeah, we had absolute classic Flanders mud and rain and everything. Mind you, we were there in January, so
So I believe he went over the top at about 4 a.m.
yeah.
waist deep in mud. Oh, here we are. Yes, there he is, look. Lieutenant Jack England, Welsh
Regiment.
clinician killed.
Good Lord.
Welsh war heroes, August the 8th, 1917. Does he look like what we think he looks like? What did you expect? Has he got a moustache?
I don't think he has, which I think I was kind of expecting, but
Gosh,
my goodness.
extraordinary. I wonder if there's a little bit about him as well. Really?
Oh, here we are, guns in Flanders, violent bombardment in process. Lieutenant Jack England, who was killed while leading his men in the course of duty, was the...
In the push
Oh.
on July the
push-
31st.
ah, yes. Was the only son of Mr. and Mrs.
TH, that's Thomas
yes.
Harper,
Okay.
England.
He was educated at Cardiff High School and King's College Taunton, yep. It's a terrific
Write-up, isn't it?
isn't it?
Like, it's so sad 'cause his father was really heartbroken.
I have something to show you as well, which is the famous watch.
I can't wait for this.
Well, University College London have let it out of the conservation lab.
I can't wait to see it.
Well-
I really can't. How extraordinary. And this is the watch his father so desperately wanted some little bit of him to remember him. Am I allowed to touch it? No, probably not.
Probably not, actually, because
No,
every
we don't.
time Renata's touched it, she's been wearing rubber gloves. So
Be careful then.
yeah,
After all, nature's preserved it for so long.
yeah.
Just to think that his father, craved for a little something like that, a little memento of his son.
And it might
And
be it.
It's
Yeah.
myself now, almost 100 years later, looking at it.
It's yeah.
Wonder if he knows. Isn't that extraordinary? It's absolutely amazing to find things intact like that.
John H. England died at Passchendaele, and his watch was never returned to his father. No Man's Land asked a watch expert to examine the watch found in the trench. He's come to a startling conclusion. Ziggy Veselovsky is the leading authority on vintage watches.
I've come across a number of watch straps that are in better condition. In fact, I've brought some with me where they're marked up with a variety of different sort of details. And of course, these very much were disposable commodities.
Right. So what we could have is a watch that's passed through a number of straps.
It's possible, yes.
Okay.
Or when it was retailed here in the UK, if that is in fact the case, then maybe the retailer would have sold it with a made in England leather strap.
Right. Yes. And I have to ask this: are the straps going to have "Made in England" stamped on them?
Many of them do.
Right. So, Dean, at the risk of upsetting all of my colleagues who've done an awful lot of hard work and research, does it say "Made in" on here?
I think if you look at the way that the lettering is spaced across the watch strap,
Yeah.
we have evidence of an M at the beginning of the sequence, which
Okay.
corresponds to the position of the D at the end. So we have an M, we have an in, and we have an England.
Yeah.
I think the most likely conclusion is that it's made in England.
It's an English watch strap that's been attached to an American watch.
A watch strap made in England, or John H. England's watch scratched with his name. No one will ever know.
What I can't do is tell you whose wristwatch it is. But through the archaeology, what I can tell you is an awful lot about the place and the conditions in which the owner of that watch lived in that bizarre, dislocated time in that period leading up to the Battle of Passchendaele, when he went forward out of those trenches, when who knows how his wristwatch was lost. He remains, whether he survived or not, in terms of our work, he remains one of the unknown soldiers. And so that wristwatch stands now as a symbol for all of those soldiers on the Menin Gate and on the other memorials who remain known unto God.
The Menin Gate Memorial is at Ypres, near Passchendaele. It's inscribed with the names of Empire and Commonwealth soldiers from the Great War, including 55,000 British who have no known grave, but who died near this spot. A British soldier who lost his watch at Passchendaele may be among them. His remains still lying there waiting to be found. And his name may be John Humphrey England.